The kingdom of Sokoto was, by every metric used in the ancient world, a masterpiece of human industry and relentless, successful conquest. It did not merely occupy space, it dominated its quadrant of the continent, sprawling across the fertile plains where the river Osun, the lifeblood of the realm, carved the serpentine path of iridescent silver. The capital city, also bearing the name Sokoto, was not built, it was hewn from ambition and draped in gold. Its walls, constructed from deep red earth bricks baked harder than iron, rose against the equatorial sky, seeming to challenge the very sun with their height. At the epicenter of this gilded domain stood the royal palace, an architectural declaration known across 3 continents as the Dome of the Ascendant Sun. It was a structure of breathtaking, intimidating scale. The central hall was roofed with a colossal dome crafted from hammered copper that, when bathed in the fierce midday light, flared with such intensity it seemed to pulse with captured solar energy. The inner courtyards were paved not with humble stone, but with mosaics of polished obsidian and jasper, reflecting the king's belief that even the ground beneath his feet must testify to his incomparable glory. The man who had willed this grandeur into existence was King Shaka. Shaka was not a monarch born to quiet contemplation, he was a force of nature, a man whose presence was a heavy, palpable thing that weighed on the shoulders of every person in the room. He possessed the rare ability to be entirely silent and yet completely overwhelming. His face, often set in an expression of satisfied calculation, was etched with the lines of relentless strategic thinking, a terrain map of a life spent accumulating assets, consolidating power, and crushing every rival who dared to question the supremacy of his gold. To King Shaka, wealth was not a means to an end, it was the ultimate, undeniable truth of the cosmos. He viewed currency, be it in the form of Ashanti gold, rare spices, or the enslaved labor of a neighboring, defeated tribe, as the singular, objective metric of human value. A man's worth was precisely equal to his material holdings. Character, loyalty, kindness, creativity, these were merely soft, subjective adjectives, decorative flourishes that collapsed instantly when tested against the heavy reality of a full treasury. He was convinced, with an arrogance that bordered on religious zeal, that he was the most valuable man alive because his vault was the most impregnable. His throne room, a place of formalized, paralyzing ceremony, perfectly encapsulated his philosophy. The throne itself was carved from a single block of dense, black wood, framed by 2 colossal tusks of ancient ivory, and inlaid with diamonds the size of a pigeon's egg. But the true symbol of his power lay not in the chair, but in the elaborate, labyrinthine accounts room house directly beneath it. Here, shielded by 6-inch thick bronze doors, a cohort of nervous, perpetually overworked scribes tallied the royal inventories. Shaka would spend hours in this subterranean chamber, finding a sense of peace that no surface world comfort could replicate, listening to the rhythmic, comforting clatter of gold coins being shifted and weighed. This was his sanctuary, the altar where he worshipped the quantifiable fact of his dominion. The prosperity of Sokoto, though legendary, was a brittle thing, held together by the king's tyrannical focus on trade balance and military superiority. The common folk lived well enough, shielded from famine by the Osun's bounty and the king's efficiency, yet a certain spirit of gaiety had been gradually extracted from the city's heart. Festivals were meticulously timed, joy was supervised, and spontaneous human connection often felt shadowed by the awareness that a careless word or a meager showing of respect could lead to a swift, unforgiving withdrawal of the king's favor. Shaka's entire strategy for his legacy was simple: accumulation through strategic marriage. He had successfully woven his lineage into the fabric of 2 northern kingdoms and 1 coastal empire through marriages that were universally, coldly pragmatic. Now, with Princess Amara, his only daughter, he faced his final, most crucial dynastic maneuver. Amara was his masterpiece, an unplanned creation of unexpected brilliance. He had educated her not as a delicate blossom, but as a potential monarch, instructing her in statecraft, economics, and warfare. He respected her mind, he just feared its idealism. He saw her as the final piece of pure, flawless gold in his vast treasury, and she was meant to be exchanged for the one thing he still lacked, an unbreakable, multi-generational guarantee of more wealth and more power. The constant parade of suitors that flowed through the palace gates was a testament to Amora's dual appeal, her legendary beauty and her inheritance. They arrived in waves, each delegation more ostentatious than the last. There was Prince Oba from the Savannah lands, whose family possessed entire diamond mines. His tribute often consisted of massive, flawless stones presented on pillows of white silk, but his eyes were hard and reflected only his own image. Then there was Prince Tumo, whose realm bordered the Great Salt Lake. He brought fleets of war horses and disciplined legions of soldiers, seeing Amora as the strategic bridgehead for his next military campaign, his conversation solely concerned with logistics and troop movements. Shaka found himself deeply satisfied with these options. They understood the language of price. They spoke in fractions of a kingdom, in percentages of control, in units of military might. They viewed Amora exactly as he did, the most valuable asset available in the political market. What King Shaka failed to account for, what his ledgers and his military maps could never plot, was the boundless, unpredictable, and entirely unquantifiable nature of the human spirit. He saw the opulent prison he had built and called it security. He saw his daughter's life planned out in meticulous detail and called it dynasty. He never noticed the quiet disquiet in Amora's gaze, the look that suggested she saw the palace not as a home, but as a truly magnificent, yet ultimately suffocating, tomb. Amora's existence was, by the king's precise design, a study in disciplined perfection. Her youth was not a period of unburdened discovery, but an intensive regimen of tutelage aimed at producing a monarch capable of maximizing the returns on her inheritance. King Shaka employed a legion of scholars, but their mandate was rigidly focused. They were to train her mind to be a more effective instrument of his will. She mastered the complexities of transcontinental trade law with daunting fluency, could instantly compute the compound interest on loans to vassal states, and understood the brutal logistics required to maintain a standing army on 3 different fronts. Her father ensured she saw the world as he did, a chessboard where every piece, even herself, was a value unit to be moved with cold, rational efficiency. Yet, within the Princess Amora, a parallel, subversive education was taking place, a silent rebellion driven by innate curiosity. The opulent libraries of Sokoto housed not just financial records and military histories, but also volumes of ancient poetry, anthropological studies of the lesser tribes, and philosophical treatises on the nature of justice and equity. These works, often dismissed by her tutors as historical curiosities, became her secret syllabus. She would spend hours late into the night, the soft glow of an oil lamp illuminating her face, passing the arguments of long-dead sages who dared to suggest that a society's true strength lay in its compassion, not its coffers. Her greatest unintended teacher was Elder Juma, the keeper of the royal scrolls. Juma, a man whose skin was the color and texture of seasoned parchment, had witnessed the rise and slow moral calcification of Shaka's dynasty. He had long since retreated from active politics, finding solace in the archival dust, but in Amora, he recognized a flicker of hope, a restless intelligence caged by excessive security. He never explicitly taught her defiance, instead, he taught her perspective. "Princess," Juma would murmur, his voice as dry as desert air, "your father shows you the face of the mountain, the summit of gold. I show you the roots, the deep, unseen networks of water and earth that actually hold the mountain in place. A crown is a beautiful, heavy thing, but if the roots are rotten, the crown will eventually fall, taking the summit with it." This duality shaped her worldview. She was a master of the ledger, yet she longed for the lyric. She was capable of ordering battalions, but she detested the calculated cruelty of conquest. The Ashanti gold ring, the staggering heirloom that rested on her finger, became her most profound symbol of emotional confinement. It was exquisite, fashioned by master smiths, a hypnotic, spiraling monument to limitless wealth. Yet, when she looked at it, all she saw was the vast disparity it represented, the villages it could feed, the lives it could mend, the sheer, crushing weight of unspent potential. The constant intrusion of the suitors only magnified her isolation. They were not men, they were gilded projections of King Shaka's ambitions. Prince Oba, with his diamond tribute and his practiced, empty compliments, was the worst offender. Princess Amora, Oba would preen, his velvet robes rustling like dry leaves, your beauty is matched only by your father's treasury. Together, we shall ensure that our children's dominion stretches from the great northern lakes to the very edge of the western sea. We will count our blessings in caravans. She found his arrogance physically repellent. My Lord Oba. She countered one afternoon, her voice deceptively smooth, I am trained in logistics. Tell me, if a merchant fleet carrying our essential salt supply were to sink off the coast due to a rogue storm, what is the true value of the diamonds we wear in that moment? Oba stammered, his polished facade cracking. He had no answer, because he had never conceived of a problem that could not be solved by throwing more wealth at it. The very concept of uncontrolled loss was alien to his materialistic mind. Amora needed air. The confines of the dome of the ascendant sun, with its marble floors and polished mirrors, felt increasingly like a gilded cage, reflecting back only an image of what she was supposed to be, not who she actually was. She devised an elaborate, methodical system of palace escapes. Utilizing the knowledge of the palace's old water channels, a system of irrigation tunnels rarely used since the previous king's reign, she found a way to bypass the heavily guarded main gates. One afternoon, under the pretense of a lengthy, solitary session of philosophical meditation in a rarely visited garden grotto, she slipped away. Dressed in the simple, dusty robes of a palace servant and covering her hair and face with a coarse shawl, she descended into the cool, dark earth, navigating the narrow tunnels until she emerged far outside the capital walls, near the sprawling, bustling, uncontrolled chaos of the common village. The contrast was immediate, visceral, and overwhelming. The air outside the palace smelled not of rare imported perfumes and polished metal, but of wood smoke, sweat, roasted maize, and the rich, earthy scent of the river. Life here was not planned in quarterly reports, it was a vibrant, immediate negotiation with the elements. Children chased stray chickens, merchants haggled with a theatrical ferocity, and everywhere, people were touching, laughing, and living with an unsupervised authenticity that took Amora's breath away. It was in this cacophony of authentic living that the pivotal moment occurred. A sudden, terrifying torrential downpour exploded from the sky, turning the dusty paths into treacherous mud rivers in seconds. The market scattered. Guards and merchants alike scrambled for the nearest durable shelter. Amora, huddled beneath the awning of a hastily shuttered spice stall, watched the unfolding scene. It was a moment of sheer, raw elemental power, and in the midst of the watery chaos, she saw him. He was not retreating to shelter. His workshop, a humble structure of woven reeds and thatch, was already starting to flood, threatening his inventory of drying clay pieces. Yet, he ignored the damage to his own livelihood. His attention was fixed on a small, whimpering creature, a stray puppy, its leg clearly broken, trapped in a rapidly collapsing ditch where the water was pooling dangerously. The man, Kofi, rushed straight into the deluge. He didn't hesitate for a moment, plunging his hands into the cold, churning mud. His body shielded the small animal from the worst of the rain, his movements deliberate and tender as he gently lifted the puppy, cradling it against his chest as if it were a fragile artifact of immense worth. His face, streaked with water and mud, was a portrait of pure, uncalculated compassion. He looked totally exhausted, soaked to the bone, and possessed of a kind of luminous, selfless grace that eclipsed every diamond Amora had ever seen. The princes of the realm would have ordered the servant to save the dog, or more likely, simply stepped over it. Kofi, the man of dust and clay, had saved it himself, valuing a worthless life above the ruin of his own small business. In that single, torrential moment, the labyrinthine calculations of King Shoko's treasury became mute, meaningless noise. Amora realized, with a clarity that shocked her spirit, that she was hopelessly, irrevocably in love, not with a position, not with a title, but with the unquantifiable courage of a man's heart. The thread of character her father dismissed as fanciful nonsense was, in fact, the strongest anchor she had ever encountered. The space beneath the great baobab was a cathedral of antiquity, a sanctuary wholly untouched by the cold, calculating influence of King Shoka's dominion. This tree was less a plant and more a monumental sculpture carved by centuries of wind and sun, its immense, gnarled trunk providing a comforting, cavernous shelter. It stood exactly halfway between the smothering opulence of the dome of the ascendant sun and the humble, pulsating energy of the river village, a neutral territory where rank dissolved and only truth held currency. For Amora, visiting this site was a complex, multi-layered treason. It was a betrayal not merely of her father's mandate, but of the very economic dogma that underpinned the Sokoto dynasty. Each escape was a meticulously calibrated risk, requiring a level of logistical planning usually reserved for state visits. She utilized her detailed knowledge of the palace's rarely guarded service tunnels and the intermittent patrols of the outer ring, transforming her regal intellect into the skill set of a master smuggler. She shed the heavy silks and restrictive jewels, donning coarse, anonymous homespun cloth that swallowed her royal identity whole. The reward for this immense danger was coffee. Their meetings were not the frivolous assignations of star-crossed teenagers, they were profound, subversive communions. Amora, who lived a life structured around the acquisition of things, came to listen to a man who possessed absolutely nothing save his skill and his philosophy. Kofi's workshop, situated close enough to the river that the air was perpetually humid and scented with rich, elemental earth, became the crucible for her new understanding of reality. The workshop itself was a lesson in minimalist, deliberate living. There were no superfluous objects, only functional tools. Wooden paddles, smooth river stones, and large, unglazed vessels were the clay cured. The floor was packed earth, worn smooth by years of purposeful movement. The very atmosphere was saturated with the smell of wet clay and the faint, sweet scent of burning wood from the small kiln. Amora had been raised on the cold, sterile smell of polished marble and expensive frankincense. She found the rich, elemental scent of Kofi's world profoundly grounding. Kofi's craft served as the primary lexicon of their courtship. He didn't woo her with hollow rhetoric or promises of future glory. Instead, he taught her about the patience of the earth. "Look at this, Amora," he would murmur, his hands moving with the hypnotic, fluid grace of a dancer over a spinning wheel. "This clay is chaos. It is dust, water, and impurities. But with time, pressure, and the absolute focus of the hand, it becomes a vessel. It holds what is valuable: water, grain, life. The Ashanti gold on your finger is already perfect, already finished, it can only exchange hands. But this clay, it holds potential. It requires work, and it must be fired in the crucible of loss to become strong. Finger and irritating, heavy weight, found the yielding, responsive nature of the clay intensely therapeutic. She learned to discern the subtle differences in the river clay, understanding that true quality was often buried deep, not plated on the surface. Their dialogue moved far beyond the superficial. Amora, burdened by the strategic expectations of King Shoka's statecraft, asked, "How can one find peace when the world demands you endlessly calculate profit and loss?" Kofi answered with the simplicity of profound truth, "The river never asks if it is profitable to flow, princess. It flows because it is its nature. Joy is not a commodity to be purchased, it is the effortless outflow of living authentically. The wealth your father counts is fleeting, it requires constant defense." Bola did not require proof, he required a verifiable pattern. He began to track the anomalies, not with armed patrols, but with the quiet deployment of his most trusted, silent runners. One fateful evening, as Amora scrambled back toward the concealed entrance to the water tunnels, a minuscule thread of royal silk, a distinctive weave used only in the princess's personal chambers, snagged and tore from her disguised robe. It fluttered down, invisible to her, landing on the root of a low-lying shrub near the river's edge. The next morning, Bola's most observant runner found it. It was a solitary, insignificant piece of fabric, but to Bola, it was an axiomatic truth. He held the silk, a shocking, vibrant red against his dark palm, and understood immediately that the princess had been outside the walls, and the reason for her transgression could only be something that possessed a value that defied the king's entire accounting system. The discovery was not yet proof, but it was the unraveling thread. Bola presented the silk not to the king, but to the king's chief minister, an ambitious man named Jara, confirming their shared, dark suspicion. The gilded cage had been breached, and the priceless jewel of the kingdom had found solace in the dust. The revelation was not merely a scandal, it was an existential threat to the dynasty's perfectly calculated future. The capture was now only a matter of time and strategy. The air in the king's subterranean accounts room, a sanctuary usually humid with the silent, self-congratulatory chill of quantified success, instantly fractured when Bola, the spymaster, presented his evidence. Bola did not speak, he merely uncurled his hand, laying the single, vivid thread of Amora's forbidden royal silk upon the king's meticulously balanced final ledger, a crimson slash across the pristine columns of gold yields and trade surpluses. This microscopic piece of evidence was not a rumor, nor a suspicion. It was an incontrovertible fact that defied every metric of the king's worldview. King Shaka, who controlled entire rivers and mountains, found that his perfectly ordered reality had been irrevocably violated by something as fragile and insignificant as a single strand of thread. The realization triggered a psychological cataclysm. His face, which rarely betrayed an emotion more violent than calculated dissatisfaction, contorted into a mask of pure, ontological betrayal. This was more than disobedience, it was an unbudgeted variable, an irrationality that threatened to invalidate his entire life's work. An artisan of clay, Shaka's voice was initially a low, terrifying rasp, escalating swiftly to a thunder that seemed to shake the palace's bronze-reinforced foundations. The price of this betrayal cannot be calculated. My daughter, the single most valuable dynastic asset in this kingdom, has exchanged our immutable destiny for the fleeting companionship of dust and water. The capture was executed with brutal, clinical efficiency. A troop of the king's elite guard, known for their absolute silence and unwavering loyalty to the treasury over all else, descended upon the river village. They found Kofi exactly where he was always found, by the river's edge, meticulously smoothing the surface of a magnificent, unglazed water urn. Kofi offered no resistance. He did not plead, nor did he attempt to flee. When the captain of the guard presented the royal warrant, Kofi simply wiped the wet clay from his hands onto his rough tunic, looked toward the distant, shimmering copper dome of the palace, and submitted to the chains. This stoic lack of fear infuriated the guards more than any act of physical defiance, as it suggested a moral victory that their brute force could not touch. He was taken to the iron pit, the deepest, most lightless sublevel of the royal dungeons, a place reserved for those who had committed crimes against the inviolability of the monarchy itself. The oppressive silence and the constant, chilling drip of groundwater were intended to crush the human spirit, replacing wisdom with despair. The king saved his most searing fury for Amora. She was summoned to the great hall, which was deliberately filled with the sneering faces of the discarded princes and the scandalized ministers. The scene was designed as a public shaming, an attempt to use the immense weight of the court's judgment to force her immediate repentance. You have committed dynastic sabotage. Shaka roared, pointing to the Ashanti gold ring on her finger. You possess the wealth of 1,000 destinies and you debase yourself for a man whose total net worth amounts to a few clay pots. Explain to me the mathematical logic of this treason. Amora met his incandescent fury not with tears or a lowered gaze, but with a silence so absolute, so profoundly anchored, that it momentarily acted as a vacuum, drawing the air from the king's tyrannical lungs. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, yet resonated with an authority no royal education could impart. My lord father, you speak of logic. You speak of price. I ask you, what is the price of courage? What is the price of unconditional compassion? You offered me Oba, a man whose heart is a ledger. You offered me Tumo, whose ambition is a blade. Kofi offered me truth. I assure you, father, the true value of that truth far exceeds the sum of your entire treasury, and I will marry no other. Her defiance, particularly her use of non-quantifiable language, courage, compassion, truth, struck Shocker not as emotional hysteria, but as a direct intellectual challenge, a rejection of his fundamental laws of governance. He could not, dare not, simply execute Kofi. To kill the man of truth after being accused of prioritizing price would instantly transform Kofi into a martyr and Amora into a political revolutionary, risking popular unrest among the village folk who already viewed the potter as a symbol of integrity. The king needed a solution that would publicly invalidate Kofi's philosophy. He needed a test that appeared philosophical but was, in its essence, a sophisticated, unwinnable market demand. He retreated to the accounts room for 3 days, not to tally gold, but to devise a cognitive trap worthy of his financial acumen. He emerged, cold and calculating, with the ultimate trial. The royal decree was broadcast throughout Sokoto by the ceremonial town criers, drums beating a heavy, resonant rhythm that drew every citizen to the central plaza. The noise of the city, usually dominated by the sound of commerce, was utterly silenced by the weight of the king's pronouncement. Hear ye! Hear ye! By the absolute authority of King Shocker, the fate of the artisan Kofi and Princess Amora shall be decided by a trial of unquantifiable worth, the chief herald declared, his voice echoing off the palace walls. The pauper has claimed his value lies outside the ledger. The king shall test this claim. The challenge was delivered with the precision of a contract. If this poor man can bring his majesty, within the span of 1 full moon cycle, 3 sacred gifts that demonstrably possess value without price, that hold no monetary equivalent in any known kingdom, he shall be granted the princess's hand and full pardon. If he fails to procure even one, his banishment shall be permanent, and he shall never again be permitted to breathe the air of Sokoto. This was the master stroke of the accountant king. He had given Kofi a challenge that, in his materialist view, was mathematically impossible. How does one place value on the priceless? The court immediately erupted in dismissive laughter. The wealthy princes, including Oba and Tumo, exchanged self-satisfied glances, their confidence restored. A priceless object, by Shocker's rigid definition, simply did not exist. The trial was not a test of character, it was a guaranteed, public demonstration of the pauper's fatal, philosophical flaw. Amora was returned to the highest tower, now under triple guard, her fate sealed to the outcome of this abstract, terrifying impossibility. She realized the king had not asked for gold, he had asked Kofi to dismantle the very foundation of Shocker's sovereignty. Meanwhile, in the absolute darkness of the iron pit, Kofi, shackled and shivering, began the silent, immense task of searching not the earth, but the depths of his own soul for the currency the king had never known existed. The king's decree, the requirement for 3 gifts of value without price, did not merely initiate a search, it ignited a paroxysm of speculation and mockery across Sokoto. The wealthy court, led by the disdainful princes, treated the trial as a cruel, protracted joke, a theatrical demonstration of the pauper's impending doom. Prince Oba, the diamond magnate, was particularly vocal. In the royal assembly, surrounded by sycophants who laughed on cue, he mused loudly, the potter will bring a handful of dirt, claiming it is the value of the earth, or perhaps a stale loaf of bread, calling it the price of hunger. These peasants confuse philosophical platitudes with quantifiable reality. Oba believed that if an item couldn't be stamped with an official market price, it was, by definition, worthless. Prince Tumo, the military strategist, viewed the task as a flaw in King Shocker's logic. Why waste a full moon cycle? A decisive action is required, he argued to his lieutenants. Tumo saw everything as a tactical problem, he could conquer a fortress but could not grasp the nature of an abstract challenge. He secretly commissioned his spies to watch Kofi's associates, expecting the potter to attempt to smuggle in a rare, hidden gem, a secret, finite treasure. He could only conceive of value as something that could be seized or possessed. The general atmosphere was one of condescending certainty. The townspeople, however, harbored a deeper, complicated hope. King Shocker, watching his kingdom evolve from a cold, efficient corporation into a thriving community of shared value, found a quiet peace he had never achieved during his conquest. He learned to trust the unquantifiable, realizing that the greatest price he had ever paid was the price of his own blind obsession. Amora, finally free to exercise her intellect alongside her compassion, became a powerful co-ruler with Kofi, guiding Sokoto toward an era of unprecedented, deep-rooted, sustainable prosperity. The king's daughter had not chosen poverty, she had chosen value. And in doing so, she taught the most powerful man in the kingdom that true, enduring wealth is never possessed, it is cultivated. If this timeless tale of love, wisdom, and the revolutionary power of character resonated with your spirit and gave you a new perspective on the meaning of wealth, please take a moment to like this video. Share it with a friend or family member who needs this lesson in their life, and be sure to subscribe for more profound African stories like this. Until next time, may your path be guided by wisdom.